All right, well, here we go. Start of Unit 4, believe it or not. So it's crazy to think that we are almost in the month of June. It sure doesn't feel like June with rain this past weekend. I don't know where you're at necessarily, but where I am, there was rain this past weekend. I'm wearing a sweatshirt. Yeah, it's crazy how this weather, and then it's going to be in the 80s later this week, and it's going to feel at least a bit more like summer, although I guess summer doesn't start until June. Just a couple things. I don't want to be too long-winded in this video, but I just want to say thanks. And you've done such a great job so far. It was so fun to read through all your posts and see the conversations going on. And really, I felt like I was able to get inside your brains a little bit and see these aha moments. I love that there was some pushback. I love there was some civil dialogue that took place, even in disagreement. And going, I don't know what I think about this. I'm not sure if I like that. I don't know that, but all those different things. There were so many great approaches that occurred in the past 3 weeks. So just thank you for that. In fact, I was getting ready to send an email to Vicki Ewing, our department chair, just to say, hey, I just need you to know that I've got a really special, I'm teaching two sections, of career development this term. And I've got really special students that are really thinking deeply. And I love in the syllabus when you look at the Bloom's taxonomy of learning, I really hope, my concern and my desire is always that we're at the top, kind of, that top section. We're not in this remembering or understanding. We're really in this kind of creation stage and the things that come along with that. So this evaluation, this analysis, and really working through the content and the creation, of course, how I'm going to look at that is, in light of what you've learned, what are you going to do, right? This burden of responsibility I have resting on my shoulders. So now that I know what I know, it's here, what am I going to do with it, right? How am I going to apply this in the work that I'm getting to do with clients? Maybe you'll use this career development, maybe you won't. Regardless, though, you're really showing that you're taking the content seriously, you're asking great questions, you're being very thoughtful, and I'm really super grateful for that, so thank you. One of the things that I think about with this content when it comes to career development, when it comes to career counseling, I think that there are some questions, and I know a number of you have asked this. In fact, some of you even said I came into this class with some skepticism, wondering what's the purpose? Why are we taking this class? Thinking it was just this one-off course, and I hope that even though we're only 3 weeks in, you're realizing that it's not. My hope is that you're finding that what you're learning, what you're reading is thoughtful. It's really purposeful. There's great intention behind what it is that you're reading. I hope that you're realizing and seeing how there was, as I curated the content and the readings and the assignments and the thoughts, this is a labor of love. This is a work in progress that's taken place over the last 8 years. Because I want it to be more than just this academic exercise. I want it to be something where you can think about how it's going to affect you professionally, but also personally. So one of the reasons we have these exercises from the Tang text, this is new in the past. So spring semester of this last year, 2019, and then in the summer, it's the first time I've ever used this Tang book. And I really like this text. I really like the exercise. I really like the case studies that come out of it. Because I think what it does is it allows us to actually, in a very kind of not to scale way, but in similar ways to what you as students have to do when you go through the entire program is you have to actually go to counseling. This is going to let us work through some of the same issues. And in fact, these might actually be exercises that you potentially would use with a client if you were to ever embark on career development or career counseling with a client. So I hope that you're finding it valuable. I hope that you're seeing that it's not just this one-off class, but there's actually great integration. In fact, one of the things that I oftentimes talk about, and I don't think I've done that so far in this course, is talking about how does this fit? How does career development fit within the greater context of the work that you're studying to do eventually, or that maybe even you're doing right now? And I kind of wanted as I thought about this class and the content, I've been thinking a lot, and over the years, I've used this example of a family. Okay, so let's look at a family. Let's call it a family of four. So, in this family of four, we've got a husband who, a successful husband. Let's say been working the last 20 years full time, has a bachelor's degree, so educated, experienced. And had moved his way up through the ranks and was serving as a vice president in let's call it a tech firm. and was getting paid really well. And then things started to shift about 6 months ago, 6 months ago or so. So I'm married to his high school sweetheart for the past 21 years. She too has her degree, and when she had their 2 children, so they have a 16-year-old daughter and a 14-year-old son. They together made the decision that she was going to stay home with the kids. And she had a career in marketing, and then she gave birth to her daughter and held her in her arms. I've got to stay home. I love being home with the kids, and so they made some conscious decisions and efforts to see if they could make that a reality. For the past now 16 years, she's been doing that. But about 6 months ago, her husband got laid off. There was a merger that took place between 2 firms, and there was a reorganization. His position was eliminated, and so this nice salary, this 6-figure salary that he was bringing in, is no longer part of their family. Now he was given a severance package, and yet because he had been at the same company and moved up over the past 20 years, he had never really applied for a job. He always kind of been tapped on the shoulder, and so he was out of practice. And while he was good at what he did, he didn't really have to think about the process. And so the past 6 months have been very challenging on the family. In fact, the 14-year-old son has been getting into a lot of mischief, a lot of trouble at school. Was actually just sent to the principal's office for the 4th time for fighting at school. And the 16-year-old daughter has been very quiet and standoffish with the family. She's been very insular. She comes home from school, she shuts the door. She was just caught sneaking out this last weekend with some guy that she had been told that she could not spend time with. And so the family is in disarray, and the mother has been really asking for them to go see a counselor for quite some time, and finally they've done that. But they're not really sure what's actually taking place. There's just lots of disarray, and there's lack of communication, there's some depression, there's some real challenges going on. So it comes to find out as they are engaged in this conversation that this 14-year-old son who's in the room with the counselor by himself has been getting into fights because he used to be the cool kid. And he had all the cool clothes, and he had all the cool shoes, and ever since his father lost his job and the income had gone away, so too did the cool clothes and the cool shoes. And so he's discovering that his friends, who he thought were his friends anyway, really only liked him because he had the cool clothes and the cool shoes. They liked the affiliation with the cool kid, and so now all of a sudden he's not able to be what he once was. And in fact, his previous best friend of the last 12 years said something because he wanted to try and fit in with the other cool group, and it set this son off, and he punched him in the face. They got in a fight, and so they're just at a loss for why on earth would my 14-year-old son get into a fist fight with his best friend. And it's because he's reeling from the fact that his father has lost his job, and he's no longer able to provide in the same way that he did beforehand. 16-year-old daughter is very standoffish. She's in the room with the counselor, discovers that the dad, who was really kind of her confidant, and they had a great relationship. She looked up to him tremendously as provider and all of these things. He just kind of checked out, right? He got laid off, and he just checked out from life in general. And he sat at home, and he started to drink and got angry quickly, and was very curt with his wife and his daughter, and so she was no longer finding this affection she one time did with her dad. And what makes it even worse and harder is she was the first of her friends to turn 16, and she was promised for years that the day she turned 16, she would have not only her license but her own car. And so all of her friends were looking forward to that. And 16 came and went, and they were in the midst of this really financially challenging time as a family, and the car didn't come to fruition. And so again, she's discovering that the friends that she had really only wanted to be her friends because she was going to get this car and she could drive them around. And so the next 16-year-old birthday party took place, and all of a sudden those one-time friends now gravitated towards this other person that got the car, and so they decided they were now going to be friends, and they were going to leave the daughter out of the conversation. The mother, who had been just so involved in the home and She'd been so involved in school and loved volunteering in the community and was a staple in the community library. She had gone back to work on a part-time basis, but it was barely enough to make ends meet. And so she's coming home just exhausted and not able to continue on with the relationships. So there's lots of problems between her and her husband. And so there's anger and there's resentment, and he's been sitting at home, as I mentioned, just drinking. And so she's been begging that he go with her to a counselor, and finally he does. And he sits there in the room and he says, "There's nothing wrong. There's nothing wrong. There's nothing wrong." And finally, after much prodding, the counselor encourages him to really dig deep and identify what it is what's at hand. He says, "My identity was found in my job, and my job is gone. I feel worthless. I feel like I'm useless. I feel like I'm nothing. My kids don't look up to me anymore. My wife and I, we fight all the time." And so now there's lots of potentially other issues at play here, but you can continue to take this, one step further, another step further, and so forth. And you can see how, much like we see in the well-being text, how one's job really affects their family, their life, right? The overcoming of a job loss, Rath and Harder say, is oftentimes, sometimes, if not oftentimes, more difficult to overcome than experiencing the loss of a loved one, especially for someone that's been there for so long, that identifies kind of this identification being found in not who they are, but in what they do. And so now, again, there's lots of things at play here. There's two teenagers that are teenagers, and there's a marriage of 21 years, and there's obviously going to be some speed bumps that take place in that. But with a job loss, man, it's the core, it's the provision, it's all those things that come into play, and it just radically alters one's life and the people in their lives that are close to them as well. So one of the things that I want us to get at is I want us to see that. So perhaps as you're working with clients, it may not have been a thought for you to consider, I wonder how their employment situation is affecting everything going on in the rest of their life. But maybe now you'll be maybe a bit more aware of those realities. The other thing I want to encourage us in, and the reason that I bring in this idea of vocation and calling and have us do the readings of the Schwen and Bass text, is it's always dangerous when we start to find our identity in what it is that we do, because the very thing that we do for work, or even in our families, those things could go away. Now, I hope and pray they don't, but they could. And if our identity is not found in something that's substantially more meaningful, right? So as a follower of Jesus, my identity is found in Christ. And so my job might go away, my family might go away, my Savior will never go away. And so my identity being found and rooted in Him gives me hope, regardless of what happens in my life. And so I want us to be thinking about that, asking questions about vocation, about calling. And what does it look like to consider this just leisure, just a sleepy Sunday, a day of Sabbath? What does it look like to have that be a station of vocation, actually something that we're commanded to do in the Scriptures? What does it look like to volunteer for the soup kitchen and that actually be a station of vocation, right? There's so many different layers to this idea of vocation that take place within the context of career development. And if we don't look at those things, we miss out on something significant. And if we're working with clients, we're not actually working around this idea of what they do for the majority of their time. Or there's an article we're going to read about work-life balance. And I think work-life balance is a myth. We can't achieve work-life balance. Especially if you think about my, work-life balance, and I've got all these other things in my life, but I might find my identity in what I do, and all of a sudden that goes away. Well, then everything is thrown out of whack even more so. So there's lots of different layers to career development. There's lots of different aspects and elements of what it is that we do on a regular basis. And so I want us to consider that personally, professionally. That's why we do the exercise, that's why we do the case studies, that's why we do the 3-2-1s, right? And we actually write about 3 takeaways, 2 questions that we have from the reading, and then 1 actionable item. Not just in this ethereal, kind of implicit way, but explicitly, what are your 3 takeaways? What are your 2 questions? And what is your 2 actionable item? I give you these articles to read that kind of complement the text that we're reading. We have these discussions from Schwen and Bass. I want you to actually think about, as you've been doing so wonderfully, what do you think about what you just read? How do you combine these things and critically analyze them and kind of bring them together, bring them to bear together? And then how do you then engage in conversation with your classmates? And what questions do you ask to push and to prod and to take them deeper into what it is that they're thinking about the content as well? I hope that you're finding great value. It certainly seems that you are. Keep up the great work. Thank you so much for your commitment to the learning that I'm seeing in your writings in this class so far. Hope you have a great week, and we will see you online.